This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham talking with Rod Mullins. We'll talk some NASCAR today here on the podcast, as we do every week. And let's start, Rod, with, let's go back to Pocono. Kyle Busch has to work his way from the back of the pack after a qualifying issue, actually a post-race qualifying issue, has to work his way through the pack, beats his teammate Daniel Suarez, ends up tied for first in the chase standings. Man, what an eventful weekend for Kyle. Take us through it.
Well, I was going to go with a very short answer and say Kyle Busch won next. And go on after that, but I won't, I promise. No, seriously, Kyle Busch did not have the best car on Sunday at Long Pond Pizzle at the Pocono Raceway. He admitted it in the post-race comments more than anything that Kevin Harvick had a much better car, that they probably had about the second best car on the afternoon. But I think more than anything, Kyle Busch was more impressed with his teammate Daniel Suarez, especially there, trying to hold him off in that late charge that he had. That's, of course, the teammate from Joe Gibbs Racing, trying to hold him off as Kyle Busch picked up his sixth Monster Energy NASCAR victory of the season. But it wasn't as easy as it looked. I mean, like I said, he admitted he did not have a good car, probably the second best car on the track that day. Kevin Harvick was just eating up the time coming up through the field. I mean, if he pitted and got behind, he usually picked people off pretty quickly. He got there for a little bit of time at the short end of the race. Toward the end of the race, he thought that Chase Elliott was going to make a run at it. Then Chase Elliott, I don't know what happened, if it was just something went wrong with the car. Something happened, but then he fell back. Although the Hendrick cars finished their best finish probably of the year with William Byron, also with Chase Elliott in there and Alex Bowman, all finishing within the top 10. It was a great finish for them, but still another win eludes Chase Elliott out of this whole thing. But I think probably the big thing that we have to talk about of this race, not only was Kyle Busch winning, leading 35-33 right now over Kevin Harvick in the series points championship. You know, he's now moved ahead. He's kind of eased in there where he is. He's getting up there in the 49 wins with he tied Tony Stewart of all people. With this whole thing of tying with the 49 wins there, and so he reached a milestone. He's looking for before the season's over with, and you know he had a win in the Truck Series earlier that weekend, so it was a big thing. But I guess the big one was the aftermath of Bubba Wallace's big wreck when he hit the wall with probably about under 10 laps remaining. That's probably the thing that scared me to death of the entire weekend.
Yeah, and we got more news on Bubba coming up later in the podcast. But yeah, talk about that wreck. I mean, that was one of the scarier ones we've seen maybe all season long.
Well, it was one of those wrecks that was reminiscent of, I think Jeff Gordon had a wreck like that before. Pocono is a very unforgiving track, especially when you're making that much speed, especially in certain areas of the track. You will break, that barrier, 200, 205, but then you have to gear back down again. This time, I think when Bubba Wallace was trying to go and navigate around the tricky triangle, all of a sudden something broke loose. And going back and watching the replays, they show a hole coming up through, I think, the right or the left fender, one of those, the wheel wells there, the fender, and the brake rotor just completely, it just exploded. It came off. There was pieces of it lying over in the grass. But when I saw Bubba Wallace take off and go through the grass, I said, he's not going to stop. He's going to hit. And we're lucky he didn't hit head on. I think he would have been in worse shape if he hit head on. It was sort of a glancing blow a little bit off the right front. But, man, that safer barrier took a beating, and he got out of that car. And I was surprised that he got out of that car and was able to stand as long as he did. But it was a scary moment. I just didn't really know. I was speechless, to be entire time while I was listening to them trying to describe that on the telecast of what's going to happen if he doesn't drop that safety net down. What are we going to have here? But fortunately, he came out. But I'll tell you, he said it was one of the hardest crashes, the hardest wrecks of his career.
I said we had news coming up later in the podcast. Let's go to that right now, Bubba. So surviving that, that harrowing crash and the moments where we were all kind of had our breath, holding our breath as we were waiting to see what would happen. So off-track news with Bubba Wallace, returning for 2019-2020 to Petty. And, of course, Bubba is one of the, I guess, leading candidates for Rookie of the Year. And, so he's got a ride for the next couple of years. Talk about that news.
Well, it was one of those things of where Richard Petty had not formally announced that they had reached an agreement with Bubba Wallace as of yet. There were some rumors going around that, of course, it was just a one-year deal with Petty Motorsports or Richard Petty Motorsports. But I think all of that just kind of came to a head this past weekend at Pocono, and finally to kind of put aside the rumors of everything else of possibly even Bubba Wallace going somewhere else, which I really didn't think he was going to. Richard Petty and Richard Petty Motorsports announced that they are going to keep him for 2 years. They're going to keep him through 2020. And right now, of course, Bubba's in his first full season in the Monster Energy Cup Series. He's had a great career so far, and they've had ups and downs. Richard Petty Motorsports having, again, ups and downs this year after switching from Ford over now to Chevrolet. So they're going through a learning curve right now. But I have to say this. I think Richard Petty knows that this young man is a social media marketing powerhouse right now for this race team, and he's given them a lot more exposure than they had with Eric Almirola. And Eric Almirola has been a great driver. He's been a great driver so far for Stewart Haas, but not quite the way Bubba Wallace has been able to do things. He gets along with the fans really great, and I think that they really needed him to have some kind of stability, especially in the driver's seat, and that's the reason why Petty and them made the decision to just go ahead and push him into it and get him there for 2 more years and hope that things improve. And they've got faith in him, and that's a good thing about it. It's not going to be a one-season and done deal. He's going to be in there for 2 more years.
Yeah, you need that stability. I mean, but he's done well this year up until this stage. With what we thought was a 1-year deal, but boy, it makes it easier to just get ready for next season, knowing that you're not worrying. Are you racing for your ride? In addition to racing for points, racing to build something over the course of the season, and so that's good for him. It's also good for Petty, obviously, that this is something settled for both sides there.
Yeah, and Petty likes this young man. I mean, he is. I had a chance to see him last year when he came to the Short Track U.S. Nationals at Bristol Motor Speedway. He was driving in a Ford then at that point, and he was looking, and that was the time of where the rumors were circulating. He was going to get a cup ride. It might not be with Roush Fenway, but he was going to get a cup ride with somebody. And Richard Petty has just been, more than anything, he has been overjoyed with this young man since he signed up and he went with him. And I think it's kind of like it almost reminds me in a way of a sort of a father-son sort of deal, with Petty being the elder out of this and Petty trying to help give him that experience, but at the same time, you have Bubba who's trying to go and navigate all the different changes maybe that are from whatever Richard Petty might have known. They're navigating different directions, but both going in the same direction, if you follow my drift on that. They're both set out for that goal. They're just going about it in a different way. But Petty's handling that one end of it. Darrell Wallace Jr. is handling the social media part, and he's getting a lot more fans out of it too. Like I said, he's up for Rookie of the Year. I wouldn't be surprised to get Rookie of the Year this year with the way he is, the way his personality has been, and so forth, and the way he has kind of hung in there in some of these races.
So now let's talk some more off the track news. We've talked about this, Rod, off and on this NASCAR season, but it looks like some documents kind of got out through a blog about NASCAR formally working on the aero package for 2019. Give us more details here.
Well, according to the racing site RacingBoys.com, they got a copy of the NASCAR document that features the proposed 2019 event implementations. And so what that means is in 14 races on next year's schedule, we will probably see the aero package that they used at Charlotte Motor Speedway during the All-Star race back in May. Now, the fans could get a first look at this new All-Star package, as it's been deemed by a lot of people. It would be first implemented at Las Vegas Motor Speedway in March, and then Auto Club Speedway out in California later on March 17th. Now, there's no mention of Bristol in there because this is a completely different track setup. Bristol, of course, is a short track. Most of these tracks are either a mile and a half or 2-mile racetracks. The configuration can also be used for races at Texas Motor Speedway, Kansas Speedway, Michigan Speedway, Charlotte. Both of those races, or at least the races in May of the All-Star race and the 600, Chicagoland Speedway, Kentucky Speedway, and Indianapolis. Now, that last one there, Indianapolis Motor Speedway, this would be a big deal for them because they've been trying to keep cars competitive at Indianapolis here for the last several years. They've either had tire problems, they've had aero problems, they've had mechanical problems, one way or another. And this sort of setup would be perfect for them at Indianapolis Motor Speedway and hopefully try to bring some fans back in to the Brickyard race. But now, the work has begun for 2019. It's not a finalized deal just yet, but we're still looking at about 14 races. Could be more before it's over with, but we can rule the short tracks out of that. It's mostly going to be on the mile and a half, maybe the 2-mile tracks more than anything else.
All right, so let's get folks ready for this weekend, Watkins Glen. And I got to throw a personal thing in. My Uncle Petey, this was his favorite race. He was from up in PA. He lived down in Virginia for a while, but that's all he talked about all summer was he would go back up to at the time, it was the Bud at the Glen back when I was a kid growing up. So let's get ready for Watkins Glen, and of course we're getting closer and closer to the playoffs here. So break down the field for us and maybe some of the storylines heading into this weekend.
Well, when we talk Watkins Glen, we are talking a road course, and it is probably one of the most difficult road courses that's on the circuit. It's a 2.45-mile paved road course. Seven turns with banking that ranges from 6 degrees all the way to 10 degrees. The front stretch, you've got 2,150 feet to try to make a difference and pass someone down that long front stretch, and then you have a back stretch of 2,600 feet down. The width is going to vary in different places. Sometimes it gets very narrow down to about 36 feet, all the way to about 48 feet. Every position in this whole track on Watkins Glen International is something that you have to fight for. I mean, it's the rumble strips, it's going over the humps, it's staying in contention. You've got to be able to manage all of your brakes. You've got to be able to maintain that momentum if you build it up. I've only seen a few drivers on some road courses be able to generate some big wins out of this. One was Ernie Irvin when he was driving for the Kodak team back years ago. He drove this track really to the chagrin of all the people up in Rochester, New York for Eastman Kodak, but they were giving them big sponsorship for Morgan McClure at that time. And this is a guy that got behind on pit stops and then picked back through the field and raced through the field and just held on for dear life till he could finish one of these races up at Watkins Glen. I mean, he did fantastic work. You've got these drivers that are more accustomed to these kind of road courses. You have your Clint Boyers, who he loves this kind of track. Chase Elliott, he loves this kind of track. But you also have Kevin Harvick. Kevin Harvick loves this type of track. Kyle Busch the same way. So you've got the big three coming into this. Mark Truex, he likes this track. Even though the track is in New York, he's from New Jersey. He's been on a lot of these kind of these courses before. So we're going to see a lot of vying and jockeying for position on this race on Sunday. So it could be. This is going to be a really good, I think, a road course race, and it also kind of sets us up. To me, I think the precursor, setting us up for October. It's going to make us that much more hungry by the time that the Bank of America 500, the Roval, comes into play down in Charlotte when the first part of October. That's going to be an even bigger race. So instead of having just two road courses or two obstacle courses, however you want to call it, on the circuit. We're going to have 3 this year, and this is the one in between, and this will definitely whet our appetites before we get to Charlotte. One other minute that I want to make note of too, Chris, before we get on out of here. I don't know if many people have heard about this, but sending condolences out to Tom Higgins and his family as Tom Higgins passed away early today from suffering a second stroke. Tom Higgins was one of the greatest sports writers at the time, covered NASCAR, no doubt about it, one of the best people in the world to cover. He was 81 years old. He's definitely going to be missed in there in the pits, and a lot of people have been talking about it today with the loss of Tom Higgins. Steve Wade, who we talked about a couple of podcasts ago, being inducted into Hall of Fame. He was the one that made the announcement today because they were such good friends. So there's going to be some people that go into Watkins Glen this weekend because there's going to be some of these race teams and especially some of the owners thinking about Tom Higgins, his work with NASCAR, and really one of the people that promoted it so well during that time of the 80s into the 90s.
Yeah, thanks for throwing that in there. That's always it's a good thing to throw in. You know, the people who help make the sport what it is and what we love today. And Tom Higgins will definitely be missed. So we're ready for the Glen. We got you caught up on Pocono and some off-the-track news. As usual, Rod, great job. We're looking forward to Bristol in a couple weeks. But until then, we'll talk to you next week, and have a great week.
Okay, appreciate it, Chris. Thanks.